So in light of England losing in the penalties in Euro 2020, I think we can all imagine really how bad it must feel to be Rashford or Sancho or Saka and having missed their penalties. I think that suffering a defeat really is one of the most humbling experiences you can ever face. But it's important to not let that define you, and as we'll see in history, many individuals have used their defeats to fuel their success later on. And these are some of the people that have really changed the world forever. So let's take a look at them. First, of course, we have Steve Jobs. So Steve Jobs was, of course, fired from Apple in 1985. So this was after he'd reached incredible success with the company at a very young age. But he was then fired by CEO John Scully, which allowed him to then go on and form another company called Next, and also help fund another company called Pixar, which went on to create Toy Story and 20 more films. So really, he used that time off to focus on much more, creative activities. And in an ironic twist, he was brought back into Apple in 1997 and was largely responsible for reviving it, as it had been on the verge of bankruptcy. After that, of course, he changed the world with items such as the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, which are what I'm using right now, iMac, iTunes, and everything, right? So, incredible story. And quote, as he says, "I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me." Next up, we have an absolutely incredible American figure in history, Ulysses S. Grant. So Ulysses S. Grant went from abject poverty for 7 years and struggling to feed his family to then helping to win, really, the American Civil War and freeing the African American slaves. After graduating from West Point, Ulysses was accused of drinking. And after the accusation, he left the army and lived those 7 years in poverty and really struggled to feed his family. It wasn't until after the Civil War broke out that he enlisted as a volunteer and then gradually climbed the ranks, victory by victory, until he was appointed as a US general. After winning critical battles, he defeated Robert E. Lee and literally saved the Union, won the war, and played a critical role, of course, in freeing the African American slaves, and then became the president. So, amazing story there. Next, we have Walt Disney, who changed cinema and animation with Snow White and Cinderella and all of those films. His first company actually failed after just 1 year in business, so this was a studio called Laugh-O-Gram Films, which failed in 1923. He then spent 5 more years with a very tough streak, so he only made a few $100s from his next cartoon series called Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. But after 5 years, he came up with an idea on a train heading to California of a character of a mouse. Mickey Mouse was born, and the rest is history, so he'd go on to then create Snow White, Seven Dwarfs, Pinocchio, Fantasia, Dumbo, Bambi, Cinderella, and much more. Next up we have George Foreman. So here's a sporting icon, of course, one of the biggest punchers in history. So in 1983, George Foreman actually had to file for bankruptcy after spending $5 million of his earnings from his very successful boxing career. But was that it? Of course not. No. So typically when you get to a certain age, of course you can't fight or you can't do these activities anymore. But 10 years from his last fight, so in 1987, it'd been 10 years since he previously fought, he then made a comeback at the age of 38, which is unheard of. He then fought 28 more times, climbing the ranks again, against what everybody thought was possible. He fought Evander Holyfield in his prime, and he eventually defeated Michael Moorer to become the heavyweight champion of the world again. So as well as this, he then created the George Foreman Grill, which has sold over 100 million units since its introduction. So fantastic story there of George going from amazing success to then being defeated and losing everything, to then coming back and being more determined than ever and, succeeding in an even greater way than he had done before. Next we have Larry King. So Larry King is of course one of the most famous talk show hosts of all time. He filed for bankruptcy actually in the 1970s after several bad business deals. He was even arrested by the Florida police after a former partner of his accused him of grand larceny. But Larry King's an example of perseverance, so he stuck with the Larry King Show and Larry King Live, which then became a Guinness Book of World Records winner for the longest running television show hosted by the same person on the same network and on the same time slot. So fantastic story there. So next up we have Henry Ford. Now Henry Ford of course created the Ford Motor Company, which really changed the world in so many ways. It wasn't easy for him to start out with, so he tried 2 times and failed 2 times in creating previous car companies. So the first one was the Detroit Automobile Company, which failed. And second time was the Henry Ford Company, which also failed. They say because his perfectionism really resulted in too few cars being produced. But third time lucky, so he created the Ford Motor Company, which turned the car from being a luxury item to something an average American worker could afford. And also it encouraged companies to give higher wages to employees and really changed the way manufacturing worked from then on. So as you can see, really there's a lot of great individuals in history who had to not only overcome defeat, but they used the defeat, I think, to fuel their success. People like Steve Jobs, they wouldn't have learned the things that they did unless they had really been defeated. I mean, you could say that being defeated really gives you that kind of that survival edge almost, or that motivating fire inside, it seems. Like, you have these individuals like Ulysses S. Grant who really hit rock bottom with poverty, 7 years of poverty, Ulysses S. Grant, before then going on to, help free the African American slaves. That's amazing, right? Or Steve Jobs as well, but differently in that he already had achieved success before, being fired and almost publicly humiliated really after that. And then, of course, coming back and changing the world with iPhones and iPads and things. Really, there's so many cases where individuals have gone from rock bottom to using that to then achieve amazing successes. And I think that unless they had been defeated, so just like Steve Jobs said, unless they'd been defeated and really been humbled, they wouldn't have achieved that success that they did. So really that's the message of this video, is that if you're suffering a defeat, don't let that define you, but instead use that as a fuel to then go on and achieve even greater things, and that it may have been the best thing that's ever happened to you.